The floor was rated to survive a collapsing moon. Then the human walked in. The gravity laboratory aboard Helios Research Station remained perfectly silent except for the low mechanical hum of the containment rings suspended beneath the ceiling. Pale blue holographic displays floated across the massive chamber, while dozens of alien scientists monitored pressure fluctuations from behind reinforced observation glass, nearly 6 inches thick. At the center of the room stood the gravity platform itself, 40 feet wide. Solid black alloy. Dense enough to survive military bombardment, according to station records. Veilira then adjusted the glowing data visor near her temple while reviewing the calibration numbers drifting across her display. Gravity increase holding stable at 4.7 planetary units. One technician announced calmly from the upper control deck. Structural integrity nominal. Veilira nodded once without looking away from the readings. The experiment itself was not unusual. The Interstellar Science Council had spent decades studying how different species adapted to gravitational pressure across hostile environments. But humans remained a problem. Every biological prediction about them kept failing. Bones too dense. Muscles too resilient. Hearts capable of maintaining oxygen flow under stress levels that should have caused organ collapse in most civilized species. Earth itself already exceeded comfortable gravity thresholds for nearly half the known galaxy, which made humans deeply unsettling to scientists who preferred predictable biology. Subject arriving. Another voice echoed softly through the chamber. The massive security doors at the far end of the laboratory slowly separated with a deep hydraulic groan. Cold vapor rolled briefly across the polished floor. Then Ethan Cole stepped inside, carrying a dented steel coffee thermos beneath one arm. The human looked nothing like the military-enhanced predators most alien researchers expected. He wore faded cargo pants stained with engine grease, heavy work boots, and an old brown station jacket with worn fabric near the elbows. His dark blonde hair carried faint gray streaks near the temples despite him being only 47 years old. Exhaustion sat permanently beneath his blue eyes like something carved there over time. Ethan stopped near the center of the chamber and glanced upward toward the enormous gravity rings hanging above him. "This gonna take long?" he asked quietly. One of the scientists blinked in confusion. "You are standing inside a classified gravitational research chamber." Ethan unscrewed the thermos lid calmly. Steam curled upward into the cold laboratory air. "Yeah," he muttered. "Still got maintenance shift in 2 hours." Several researchers exchanged uneasy glances behind the observation glass. Veilira studied the human carefully through the display scanner hovering beside her wrist. His medical readings already showed elevated muscle strain before the test had even started. Old injuries. Repeated stress damage. Signs of long-term physical labor. Yet his posture remained relaxed. Casual. Like exhaustion had become background noise years ago. Beginning Phase 1 pressure increase, the technician announced overhead. A deep mechanical vibration rolled through the laboratory floor. Invisible weight settled slowly across the chamber as the gravity rings intensified above them. Ethan barely reacted. He simply took another drink of coffee while staring at the ceiling lights. Pressure increased stable at 6.2 units. Still nothing. Veilira narrowed her glowing blue eyes slightly. Most species required medical assistance before reaching those levels. Several needed skeletal reinforcement surgeries simply to function under half that pressure. Ethan shifted his shoulders once beneath the station jacket. Feels kinda like cargo week back on Titan docks. Then the sound happened. Sharp. Sudden. Violent. Crack. The black alloy platform beneath Ethan's boots fractured instantly. Spiderweb fractures exploded across the reinforced floor panels, while warning lights flashed crimson throughout the chamber. Several alien scientists stumbled backward in shock. One technician nearly dropped his data tablet entirely. Ethan looked down slowly at the cracked floor beneath his feet, then back up toward the observation deck. He said quietly. Was that supposed to happen? Complete silence swallowed the gravity chamber. Veilira stared motionless through the reinforced glass, while the crack continued spreading beneath the human's boots inch by inch across alloy engineered to survive planetary collapse. For the first time in her scientific career, she felt something colder than fear. Curiosity. The gravity chamber remained closed for nearly 4 hours after the incident. Engineers sealed off the fractured platform behind reinforced barriers, while station technicians scanned every inch of the damaged alloy floor, searching for structural failures that should not have existed. According to laboratory records, the platform had survived asteroid impact simulations less than 3 months earlier without visible stress damage. Now a network of fractures spread across its surface from the exact place where a tired human maintenance worker had casually stood holding coffee. Veilira then stared silently at the floating structural analysis rotating above the conference table inside Laboratory Control Room 3. The holographic image displayed dozens of fracture lines spreading outward beneath Ethan Cole's recorded foot placement like cracks across frozen lake ice. Material fatigue impossible, one scientist insisted nervously. The alloy density exceeds military-grade hull reinforcement. Another researcher adjusted the glowing visor near his eyes. Then the gravity field amplified incorrectly. Negative. The rings performed within expected calibration tolerances. Silence settled heavily across the room. Nobody liked impossible data, especially scientists. Veilira looked again toward the biological scan hovering beside the fracture analysis. Ethan Cole. Human male. 47 years old. Cargo maintenance technician. Prior spinal compression damage. Repeated muscular scar tissue. Elevated bone density far above interspecies average. Sleep deprivation markers. Nutritional deficiencies. Chronic physical strain. The list continued longer than it should have. Yet somehow the human had remained standing beneath gravity levels that forced reinforced species into medical recovery chambers. Where is the subject now? Veilira finally asked quietly. One technician blinked. He left. Left. Maintenance shift began 31 minutes ago. Veilira stared at him for several seconds. After collapsing a gravity laboratory floor, he said he could not afford another write-up for being late. Several scientists exchanged uncomfortable glances around the table. Veilira slowly stood from her chair. Cargo sector location? 20 minutes later, the lower industrial decks smelled faintly of hot steel, hydraulic oil, and overheated machinery. Cargo drones moved through the massive loading corridors carrying shipping containers beneath rows of flickering industrial lights, while maintenance alarms echoed softly through the station walls. Veilira stepped carefully across the grated steel walkways overlooking docking Sector 9 until she finally saw him. Ethan Cole stood beneath a suspended cargo lift holding a heavy repair brace against a damaged loading clamp, while another worker tightened the support bolts overhead. Steam drifted upward from nearby engine vents into the cold corridor air. Ethan's old brown jacket remained streaked with grease near the sleeves. The human looked exhausted even while standing still. "Lift pressure holding," he called upward. "Almost," another mechanic answered. Ethan shifted the steel brace slightly against the damaged machinery, with visible strain moving through his shoulders. Veolyra stopped several feet away and watched silently. According to the cargo manifest displayed nearby, the damaged clamp assembly weighed nearly 800 pounds. Ethan held it in place using only his arms while speaking casually with the other workers about cafeteria coffee quality. "You should be under medical supervision," Veolyra said finally. Ethan glanced toward her briefly without releasing the support brace. "Tried that once, and spent 6 hours filling forms." He adjusted the metal brace again as another mechanic secured the final bolts overhead. "Doc told me to avoid heavy lifting." Veolyra looked toward the massive cargo assembly hanging above him. "You are currently holding industrial machinery." "Yeah." Ethan shrugged faintly. "Not very good at following instructions." The repair finally locked into place with a loud metallic click. Ethan stepped backward slowly while flexing stiffness from his hands. Only then did Veolyra notice the faint tremor running through his fingers beneath the station lights. Muscle fatigue. Severe fatigue. Yet his expression barely changed. One of the cargo workers tossed him a fresh thermos from nearby equipment crates. Ethan caught it easily. "Appreciate it." The worker laughed. "You humans drink more coffee than reactor cores burn fuel." Ethan unscrewed the thermos lid and steam curled softly upward between them. "Probably healthier than reactor fuel." Veolyra continued studying him while cargo drones drifted overhead through the industrial corridor. No dramatic confidence. No physical intimidation. The human simply moved through exhaustion like someone long accustomed to carrying weight other species considered unreasonable. "Why were you unaffected by the gravity pressure?" she asked quietly. Ethan took another slow drink from the thermos before answering. "Who says I was unaffected?" For the first time since meeting him, Veolyra noticed how carefully the human lowered the coffee afterward. Like even lifting that small weight hurt. 2 days after the gravity chamber incident, Veolyra then found herself standing silently inside Cargo Maintenance Sector 12 at 3:20 in the morning station time, watching a human fall asleep sitting upright against a shipping container. The industrial bay remained half-lit beneath rows of flickering overhead lamps while cargo drones drifted slowly through the massive corridor carrying freight between docking platforms. Steam rolled upward from nearby coolant vents into the cold station air. Ethan Cole sat alone beside an open maintenance panel with a half-empty thermos balanced loosely near one boot. One gloved hand still held a diagnostic scanner against his chest. His head leaned back against the steel wall behind him while exhaustion pulled him unconscious without ceremony. Veolyra remained several feet away watching quietly. According to station labor records, Ethan had completed 16 consecutive hours of cargo maintenance after leaving the gravity laboratory. No recovery period. No medical leave. No formal complaint. The human simply continued working until his body forced him to stop moving. One of the nearby mechanics noticed Veolyra observing him and gave a tired laugh beneath his breath. "That happens a lot." Veolyra looked toward the worker. He collapses frequently? Nah. The mechanic adjusted a damaged utility cable beside the loading rails. Only when he remembers he is tired. Several cargo workers nearby chuckled softly at the joke before returning to their repairs. Veolira did not laugh. Through the station archives, she had studied countless species adapting to difficult environments. Desert predators evolved heat resistance. Deep ocean civilizations developed pressure-stabilized organs. Radiation worlds created hardened cellular regeneration. Evolution always followed environmental necessity. But humans disturbed that logic. Their biology did not merely survive harsh conditions. It endured them repeatedly long after failure should have occurred. Ethan shifted slightly in his sleep against the steel container. His face tightened faintly from pain, even while unconscious. One of his hands rested against his lower ribs now like an old habit. Nearby maintenance monitors reflected pale orange light across the exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. He should receive treatment, Veolira said quietly. The mechanic snorted softly. Good luck convincing him. Another worker climbed down from a loading platform overhead and wiped grease from his hands using a stained rag. Ethan thinks missing work is a medical condition. That is irrational. Welcome to humans. The worker smiled tiredly before walking toward another repair station. Veolira looked back toward the sleeping human beneath the industrial lights. His station jacket remained dusted with metallic residue from the cargo lifts. Even asleep, his body looked tense. Like gravity itself never fully released him. Several minutes later, Ethan suddenly woke with a sharp inhale and immediately reached for the diagnostic scanner beside him before fully opening his eyes. Pure instinct. Work first. Consciousness second. He blinked once toward Veolira standing nearby. You been there long? 23 minutes. Ethan rubbed one hand across his face slowly before checking the time display on the maintenance panel beside him. Damn, he pushed himself upright with visible stiffness across his shoulders and back. Thought I had another hour. Veolira watched him carefully. Humans regularly continue functioning under severe exhaustion. Ethan tightened the strap on his utility gloves before answering. Most people on Earth do. Why? He stared at her for a second, like the question itself confused him. Then he shrugged faintly. Bills. Veolira remained silent. Ethan picked up the thermos beside his boot and frowned slightly after discovering it empty. Rent. Food. Medical stuff. He stood slowly beside the massive cargo rails while distant machinery hummed through the industrial bay around them. Life gets heavy. The human said it casually. Almost absent-mindedly. But Veolira noticed something unsettling inside the words. He spoke about exhaustion the same way alien scientists discussed weather patterns. Not dramatic. Not unfair. Simply permanent. Nearby warning alarms briefly echoed through the cargo sector as another freight shuttle docked against the station exterior. Massive steel beams trembled softly overhead. Ethan grabbed a fresh repair harness from the equipment rack and started walking toward the next damaged loading clamp without another complaint. Veolira watched him disappear deeper into the industrial corridor beneath flickering station lights, while fatigue still dragged visibly through every step. And for the first time since beginning her research, she realized the terrifying thing about humans was not their strength. It was how completely they normalized carrying weight. The gravity failure began at 11:14 station time with a sound almost too deep for most species to hear properly. A low metallic vibration rolled through Helios Research Station beneath the cargo decks, while industrial lights flickered once across the loading corridors. Ethan Cole looked up immediately from beneath an open freight stabilizer panel. "That is not good," he muttered quietly. Around him, the cargo sector continued moving for another 3 seconds before the station alarms finally activated. Red emergency lights flooded the corridor while warning sirens echoed through the steel framework overhead. "Gravity core fluctuation detected," the station voice announced calmly. "All personnel report to stabilization zones immediately." Nearby cargo workers exchanged confused looks as toolboxes slid slowly across the floor toward the eastern wall. Then the gravity shifted again. Harder this time. The entire industrial base suddenly felt heavier. Metal beams groaned overhead. Several alien workers collapsed instantly against the grated floor panels, gasping beneath the sudden pressure increase. One loading drone slammed downward hard enough to crack the steel beneath it. Ethan grabbed the nearest support rail automatically before the second wave hit. His boots screeched against the floor while cargo containers weighing several tons strained violently against their magnetic locks nearby. Veolira then stumbled against the corridor entrance just as another gravity surge rolled through the sector. Her glowing blue eyes widened immediately at the scene unfolding ahead. Alien workers lay pinned against the floor, unable to stand, while emergency lights flashed crimson through the shaking industrial corridor. Ethan remained upright near the damaged freight stabilizer, gripping the support rail with both hands. Barely. Gravity field spike exceeding emergency thresholds, the station voice repeated overhead. Core instability spreading through lower sectors. Veolira forced herself forward through the crushing pressure toward the nearest collapsed technician. Every movement felt impossibly heavy now, like invisible oceans pressing down across her body. Her knees nearly buckled after only a few steps. "Ethan," she shouted through strained breathing. "You need evacuation now." The human looked toward her while steadying himself against the rail. Sweat already rolled down the side of his face despite the cold station air. "Yeah," he breathed heavily. "Probably." Then another technician screamed from deeper inside the loading bay. A young alien cargo worker had become trapped beneath a collapsed magnetic loading arm, weighing nearly 1,200 pounds under normal gravity. Now it weighed far more. Ethan saw it instantly. Before Veolira could stop him, the human pushed himself away from the support rail and started moving through the crushing pressure toward the trapped worker. Each footstep slammed heavily against the steel floor. Tiny fractures spread beneath his boots with sharp metallic cracks. "Ethan!" Veolira struggled after him while nearby cargo workers remained pinned helplessly beneath the intensified gravity field. The human reached the collapsed loading arm and crouched beside the trapped technician with visible strain shaking through his shoulders. "Hey," Ethan muttered calmly toward the terrified worker. "Need you to breathe for me, all right?" The technician could barely answer beneath the pressure crushing against his chest. Ethan wrapped both hands beneath the edge of the massive loading arm. Muscles tightened visibly through the sleeves of his old station jacket. The steel beneath his boots groaned sharply. Then slowly, impossibly, the loading arm lifted several inches off the trapped worker's body. Veolira stopped moving entirely. The gravity pressure inside the cargo bay now exceeded levels considered lethal to most species. Yet the human remained standing while lifting industrial machinery under conditions that should have shattered bone structure completely. Ethan's breathing turned rough immediately. Blood appeared faintly near one nostril. But he kept holding the weight anyway. Move. He strained quietly toward the technician. Several nearby workers finally managed to drag the injured cargo handler free, while Ethan continued supporting the collapsing machinery alone beneath flashing red emergency lights. The moment the worker cleared the loading arm, Ethan let the metal crash heavily back against the floor. The impact shook the corridor beneath their feet. Ethan staggered backward immediately afterward and caught himself against the wall, breathing hard through clenched teeth. Veilira reached him seconds later. "You are injured." Ethan wiped blood from beneath his nose using the back of his glove, while trying unsuccessfully to catch his breath. "Yeah," he muttered weakly. "Gravity kinda sucks today." Then the entire station shook violently as somewhere deep below them, the gravity core began collapsing for real. The medical sector smelled faintly of antiseptic vapor and overheated circuitry when Ethan Cole finally regained consciousness nearly 2 hours later. Soft white emergency lights glowed across the recovery room ceiling, while distant alarms echoed somewhere deeper inside Helios Research Station. Gravity fluctuations still rolled occasionally through the station structure beneath the floor. Smaller now, but unstable. Ethan opened his eyes slowly and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in his body felt heavy. Not tired. Heavy. Like gravity itself had soaked into his bones and refused to leave. "You should not be awake yet," Veilira then said quietly from beside the medical scanner terminal. Ethan blinked once toward her while trying unsuccessfully to sit upright against the recovery bed. "You say that like I had options." Pain shot sharply through his ribs the moment he moved. He stopped immediately with a strained breath beneath his teeth. Veilira crossed the room calmly and adjusted the stabilization restraints along the edge of the bed. 3 fractured ribs. Severe muscular compression. Elevated spinal inflammation. Your cardiovascular system exceeded safe biological pressure limits nearly 30 minutes before you collapsed. Ethan stared at the ceiling lights silently for several seconds. "So," he swallowed dryly. "Bad news first." Veilira almost smiled. Almost. Most species would not have survived exposure beyond the second gravity surge. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Yeah, well." His voice remained rough from exhaustion. "Earth does not really produce emotionally healthy people." The station lights flickered again overhead. Somewhere far below the medical wing, deep metallic groaning rolled faintly through the structure. Veilira noticed Ethan reacting immediately to the sound. Not fear. Recognition. "Core stabilizers still failing?" he asked quietly. Veilira hesitated before answering. "Containment teams continue attempting emergency recalibration." Ethan looked toward the ceiling again. "Meaning no." She remained silent. That answer was enough. Outside the recovery room, medical personnel moved rapidly through the corridor carrying emergency field kits, while station-wide warnings continued flashing crimson across the transparent hallway displays. Ethan slowly pushed himself upright anyway despite the visible pain tightening across his face. Veilira stepped forward instantly. "You cannot return to work. Did not ask permission. Your skeletal stress markers remain dangerously elevated." Ethan swung his legs carefully off the recovery bed and sat there breathing slowly until the dizziness settled enough for him to stand. The medical floor beneath his boots groaned faintly when his weight shifted fully onto it. Veilira noticed the sound immediately. So did Ethan. Huh, he muttered softly while looking downward. That seems new. Even now, injured and barely standing, the human sounded mildly embarrassed instead of concerned. Veilira stared at him beneath the pale medical lights. Why are you attempting to return? Ethan reached for the old brown station jacket folded near the bed. Because if the gravity core collapses fully, the lower station sectors are going to crush like soda cans. He winced slightly while sliding one arm through the jacket sleeve. Cargo bays. Residential decks. Docking corridors. Veilira stepped closer. Containment specialists are already responding. Ethan gave a tired nod while fastening the jacket slowly over his bandaged ribs. Sure. Then why are you needed? The human looked at her for a moment before answering quietly. Because specialists stop when things get unsafe. Silence settled softly between them. Beyond the recovery room windows, emergency crews continued running through flashing corridors while station alarms echoed endlessly through the damaged structure. Ethan finally managed to stand fully upright, though one hand remained pressed carefully against his side. Veilira studied the exhaustion carved permanently beneath his eyes. The old injuries. The new fractures. The fatigue layered over years of carrying things too heavy for too long. Humans are not evolved for this, she whispered softly. Ethan picked up the dented metal thermos resting beside the recovery bed and checked hopefully if any coffee remained inside. Empty. Nah, he said quietly while staring into the empty container. We just get used to it. Then another violent tremor shook the entire medical wing hard enough to crack one of the ceiling light panels overhead. Emergency gravity alarms immediately screamed through the corridor outside. Ethan looked toward the flashing red hallway lights. Veilira looked toward Ethan. And somewhere deep beneath Helios Research Station, the gravity core started breaking apart faster. The gravity core chamber sat nearly 2 miles beneath the main station decks, surrounded by reinforced alloy walls thick enough to survive military bombardment. At least that was what the original station architects promised. Now the entire lower sector trembled continuously beneath unstable pressure waves, while emergency lights flashed crimson through drifting clouds of coolant vapor. Ethan Cole stepped out of the freight elevator slowly with one hand pressed against his bandaged ribs beneath the old brown station jacket. Every movement hurt now. Not sharply anymore. Deeply. Like his skeleton itself had become tired. Veilira followed close behind while emergency alarms echoed endlessly through the massive corridor ahead. Containment field integrity falling below 30%, the station voice repeated overhead. Immediate manual stabilization required. The corridor leading toward the gravity core looked almost abandoned. Emergency equipment lay scattered across the steel flooring beside overturned transport carts and cracked data tablets. One section of wall had partially collapsed inward beneath pressure distortion strong enough to bend reinforced metal beams. Gravity itself felt wrong down here. Heavy in some places. Suddenly light in others. Veilira nearly lost balance when one invisible fluctuation shifted sideways through the hallway like an ocean current. Ethan grabbed the support rail beside her immediately before she hit the wall. Easy, he muttered quietly. Even injured, the human's grip felt solid beneath the unstable gravity waves. The field distortion gets weird near core sectors. Veilira stared at him. You understand gravity fluctuations instinctively? Ethan shrugged faintly while releasing the rail. Spent 12 years hauling cargo on mining stations. You learn how bad gravity feels before equipment starts exploding. Ahead of them, the gravity core doors slowly came into view through drifting vapor. Massive circular blast doors nearly 60 feet tall sealed the entrance to the stabilization chamber beyond. Sparks rained intermittently from damaged control conduits above the doorway, while warning lights flashed along the floor beneath their boots. Several containment specialists remained collapsed near the entrance wearing pressure support harnesses. Medical drones hovered above them administering emergency oxygen treatment. None of the specialists could stand anymore. One exhausted technician looked toward Ethan and Veilira approaching through the corridor. Field pressure exceeded survivable thresholds 20 minutes ago, the technician rasped weakly. Manual stabilizer locked halfway open. Ethan stared toward the massive blast doors ahead. Meaning the core is pulling itself apart. The technician nodded once. If the stabilizer collapses fully, he looked downward instead of finishing the sentence. Nobody needed him to. Veilira studied the pressure readings flashing across the damaged control terminal nearby. Her glowing blue eyes widened immediately. The stabilization lever requires nearly 4,000 pounds of counterforce under current gravity conditions. Ethan stepped toward the blast doors quietly. Yeah, no biological operator can survive those loads. The human stopped briefly beside the cracked control panel while sweat rolled slowly down the side of his face beneath the flashing emergency lights. Probably. Veilira moved directly in front of him now. Ethan. Her voice tightened softly for the first time since meeting him. Your body is already failing. He looked at her calmly. Exhausted blue eyes beneath station alarms and drifting vapor. Bodies do that. You will die inside that chamber. Ethan remained quiet for several seconds while another violent tremor rolled through the lower sectors hard enough to shake dust and sparks from the ceiling overhead. Then he glanced toward the collapsed containment specialists near the wall. Toward the emergency medical drones. Toward the trembling station structure surrounding all of them. Maybe, he answered softly. But everybody else dies if nobody goes in there. Veilira felt something painful tighten inside her chest while staring at the human beneath the crimson emergency lights. Not bravery. Not fearlessness. Something heavier. Acceptance. The kind carried by people who spent their entire lives surviving things they never expected to survive in the first place. Ethan adjusted the worn sleeves of his old station jacket slowly before stepping toward the blast doors again. Back on Earth, he muttered quietly while entering the chamber access code into the cracked control panel. There are people holding their lives together every single day with less support than this station. Hydraulic locks groaned loudly around them as the massive blast doors slowly began separating open. White vapor poured outward across the steel floor. Ethan picked up an abandoned containment harness from beside the doorway and glanced toward Veilira one final time. Gravity is not the heaviest thing humans carry. Then the doors fully opened, and the weight waiting inside the core chamber became almost impossible to breathe against. The gravity core chamber looked less like machinery and more like the inside of a dying star. Massive containment rings rotated slowly through the darkness, surrounding a sphere of distorted white light suspended at the center of the room, while arcs of unstable energy snapped violently across the reinforced walls. Every surface trembled beneath impossible pressure. Steel support beams bent inward with low metallic groans. Sections of the floor had already collapsed into warped fractures spreading beneath the chamber like broken ice. Ethan Cole stepped through the open blast doors and immediately felt the full weight slam against him. His knees almost buckled on the first breath. Pain exploded through his ribs beneath the containment harness strapped across his chest, while the gravity itself seemed determined to force him flat against the floor. Behind him, Veilira struggled just to remain standing near the chamber entrance. "Pressure levels are still rising," she shouted over the screaming alarms. "Ethan, you cannot survive this environment." The human stared toward the manual stabilizer positioned across the far side of the chamber. Nearly 60 feet away. A single reinforced lever connected directly to the emergency containment field. The stabilizer remained locked halfway, engaged beneath crushing gravitational distortion. If the lever failed completely, the core would collapse inward and drag half the station with it. Ethan took one step forward. The steel beneath his boots cracked instantly. Every movement now sounded heavy enough to break the room apart. "You should leave," he muttered through strained breathing. Veilira moved toward him despite the pressure crushing against her body. "I am not abandoning you." Ethan actually smiled faintly at that. "Tired. Brief. Human." Then another violent gravity surge slammed through the chamber, hard enough to throw Veilira sideways against the wall. Ethan caught the nearest support beam before falling himself, while sparks burst from the containment rings overhead. The core light pulsed brighter now. Unstable. Hungry. "Containment failure in 6 minutes," the station voice warned calmly. Ethan pushed himself upright again. Slowly. Painfully. Every step toward the stabilizer became heavier than the last. The gravity here no longer felt physical. It felt emotional somehow. Like the chamber pressed against every exhausted part of him at once. Old injuries. Sleepless years. Endless labor. Bills. Loneliness. Survival itself. Veilira watched him move through the impossible pressure while blood slowly traced downward beneath one side of his nose again. "Why are humans like this?" she whispered softly. Ethan laughed once under his breath, without slowing down. Honestly, his voice shook now beneath the weight crushing through the chamber. "We do not really get a choice." He finally reached the stabilizer platform. The reinforced emergency lever towered above him connected directly into the core containment systems through massive hydraulic restraints. Warning lights flashed crimson across the metal surface. Manual engagement required continuous counterforce against the collapsing gravity distortion. Ethan wrapped both hands around the stabilizer handle. Immediately, his entire body shook beneath the pressure. Veilira saw the steel platform beneath his boots begin fracturing outward inch by inch. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you are already breaking." He looked back toward her through flashing red light and drifting sparks. Exhausted blue eyes. Sweat across his face. Blood beneath his nose. Old brown station jacket hanging heavy from his shoulders. A tired cargo worker standing inside a machine designed to crush worlds. "Yeah," he breathed softly. "Been doing that for years." Then Ethan pulled the stabilizer upward. The chamber screamed around him. Massive hydraulic locks groaned violently, while the gravity core surged bright enough to flood the room in white light. Ethan's arms shook immediately beneath the impossible force driving downward against the lever. Muscles tightened across his shoulders and neck hard enough to tremble visibly beneath the harness restraints. But the stabilizer moved. Slowly. 1 inch upward. Then another. Across the chamber, the collapsing containment rings finally began stabilizing fraction by fraction. Veilira stared at the human beneath the catastrophic gravity pressure while cracks spread deeper beneath his boots across the reinforced steel platform. Most species measured strength by domination. By war. By power over others. But standing there inside the dying core chamber, she realized humanity measured strength differently. Humans measured strength by how much suffering a person could carry quietly before finally collapsing. And Ethan Cole was still standing. The stabilizer lever continued trembling violently beneath Ethan Cole's hands while the gravity core chamber groaned around him like something alive and dying at the same time. Every warning light inside the room flashed crimson through clouds of drifting coolant vapor. Cracks spread wider beneath Ethan's boots across the reinforced platform, while the hydraulic restraints screamed against the pressure forcing downward through the collapsing core. Veilira could barely remain standing near the chamber entrance now. Gravity distortion rolled unpredictably through the room hard enough to bend steel railings and fracture wall panels outward. But Ethan still held the stabilizer in place. Barely. His breathing had changed. Short now. Uneven. Each inhale sounded heavy enough to hurt. Blood traced slowly downward from his nose onto the front of the containment harness strapped across his chest. One of his knees had started shaking uncontrollably beneath the pressure. Core stabilization improving, the station voice announced overhead. Containment failure probability reduced to 42%. 42. Still almost enough to kill everyone aboard the station. Veilira looked toward the control systems flashing beside the chamber wall. The stabilizer requires another 17% elevation before automatic containment engages. Ethan laughed weakly beneath his breath without looking at her. Of course it does. He pulled harder against the lever. Muscles along his arms and shoulders tightened visibly beneath the old station jacket, while the reinforced steel platform beneath him cracked deeper with sharp metallic pops. The gravity pressure inside the chamber increased again instantly. Veilira collapsed to one knee against the floor, gasping beneath the sudden weight. Ethan almost lost the stabilizer completely. The lever slammed downward several inches before he caught it again, with both arms shaking violently. Ethan, Veilira forced herself upright through the crushing pressure. Stop. The system can still evacuate upper sectors. The human remained silent for several seconds. Sweat dripped from his face onto the fractured platform beneath him. Somewhere overhead, another containment ring exploded in a shower of sparks and blinding white light. The entire chamber shook hard enough to throw debris across the floor. Ethan looked toward Veilira finally. Exhausted blue eyes beneath flashing emergency lights. Cargo deck families cannot evacuate fast enough, he said quietly. Residential rings too. Another strained breath. Too many people still down there. Veilira stared at him. Even now. Even here. The human still thought about strangers first. The gravity core pulsed brighter again. Warning sirens became almost deafening throughout the chamber. Ethan's legs suddenly buckled beneath him for half a second before he forced himself upright again, using pure instinct more than strength. Veilira saw fear flicker across his face then. Not fear of dying. Fear of failing before everyone escaped. Why? She whispered softly through the screaming alarms. Why continue? Ethan swallowed painfully while holding the stabilizer against impossible weight. Because somebody has to. The answer came immediately. No hesitation. Like the human had been carrying that belief his entire life. Veilira moved closer toward the stabilizer platform despite the crushing gravity tearing through the chamber. Every step felt impossible now. But she reached him anyway. Ethan's hands had started trembling so hard against the lever that the metal itself rattled beneath his grip. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Look at me." He did. Slowly. Tired eyes. Fading strength. "You are not alone anymore." Something changed in his expression then. Small. Almost invisible. But Veilira saw it. The exhaustion remained. The pain remained. Yet for the first time since she met him, the human no longer looked like someone carrying the entire universe by himself. Veilira placed both hands beside his against the stabilizer lever despite the pressure instantly forcing her downward. Her slender blue fingers shook violently against the freezing steel. "This is not your weight alone," she whispered. Ethan stared at her in disbelief for one quiet second while the gravity core roared around them like a collapsing star. Then together, slowly, painfully, both of them forced the stabilizer upward another inch. Across the chamber, the containment rings finally began locking back into alignment one by one. Warning alarms shifted tone throughout the station overhead. Automatic stabilization sequences started engaging across the damaged sectors. Ethan nearly collapsed immediately afterward. Veilira caught him before he hit the fractured steel floor. The human's entire body trembled violently now from exhaustion, while the chamber lights slowly dimmed from crimson back toward steady white. "Core stabilization successful," the station voice announced calmly. "Catastrophic failure prevented." Ethan leaned heavily against Veilira beneath the fading emergency lights, while steam drifted softly upward from the damaged floor around them. He closed his eyes for a second and whispered something so quietly she almost missed it. Knew the floor would break eventually. And somehow, despite everything around them, Veilira laughed. 3 weeks after the gravity core failure, Helios Research Station sounded different. The endless emergency alarms were gone now. No more violent tremors shaking the lower sectors. No more containment sirens echoing through steel corridors at 3 in the morning. Only the soft mechanical hum of repaired life support systems drifting through the station walls like steady breathing after a long panic attack. Ethan Cole sat alone near observation deck 7, holding a dented metal coffee thermos between both hands while pale starlight spilled softly through the massive viewing windows beside him. Beyond the glass, distant cargo ships moved slowly across deep space, surrounded by silent fields of drifting station debris still waiting for cleanup crews. The old brown station jacket hung loosely across Ethan's shoulders now. Medical wraps remained visible near one wrist beneath the sleeve. His ribs still hurt every time he breathed too deeply. His back hurt constantly. But compared to the gravity chamber, this almost felt peaceful. Steam curled upward from the thermos into the quiet observation deck air. Ethan stared silently at the stars while station workers passed occasionally behind him through the corridor, carrying repair equipment and supply crates. Most slowed down slightly when they noticed him sitting there. Some nodded respectfully. Others simply looked at him with quiet confusion. The human who held back a collapsing gravity core looked exactly like a tired maintenance worker drinking coffee after a long shift. Veolira then stepped onto the observation deck without making a sound. Ethan noticed her anyway. "You alien people walk too quietly," he muttered without turning around. Veolira moved beside him beneath the pale window light. "And humans walk like collapsing machinery." Ethan considered that seriously for a second. "Fair." She looked toward the stars drifting beyond the observation glass, while silence settled comfortably between them. The station had already begun rewriting official reports about the disaster. Technical explanations. Engineering language. Containment metrics. Pressure thresholds. But Veolira knew those reports would never explain what truly happened inside the core chamber. Because the station had not been saved by technology. It had been saved by a tired man who simply refused to let other people carry the weight alone. "The Science Council reviewed your biological scans again," Veolira said quietly. Ethan groaned immediately. "Please tell me nobody used the phrase, 'remarkable human specimen.'" Veolira almost smiled. Several times. Ethan closed his eyes briefly in visible suffering. "I hate scientists. They do not understand how your species survives under such physical and emotional strain." Ethan shrugged faintly while staring into the thermos. "Most humans do not understand either." Outside the observation windows, massive repair drones drifted slowly across the damaged outer hull sectors, repairing fractures left behind by the gravity collapse. Tiny lights moved silently through the darkness like distant stars rebuilding something broken. Veolira looked toward Ethan carefully. Back in the gravity chamber, she hesitated softly. "You were afraid." Ethan remained quiet for several seconds. Then finally nodded once. "Yeah, but you still stayed." Another long silence passed between them beneath the pale starlight. Ethan rubbed one tired hand slowly across his face before answering. "Most people on Earth are scared all the time." His voice remained calm. "Honest. They still go to work. Still raise families. Still survive bad years." He glanced toward the drifting stars beyond the glass. "Being afraid does not really stop humans from carrying things." Veolira studied him quietly beneath the soft observation lights. "For most species, strength meant domination. Control. Invulnerability. But humans were different. Humanity was not strong because it never broke. Humanity was strong because it kept moving while breaking." Ethan finally stood slowly from the observation seat, with visible stiffness pulling across his shoulders and ribs. The floor beneath his boots gave a faint metallic groan. Both of them noticed it immediately. Ethan sighed heavily toward the ceiling. "Seriously?" Veolira laughed softly this time without restraint. The sound surprised both of them. Ethan stared at her for a second before laughing too, despite the pain it caused his ribs. Beyond the observation windows, the stars continued drifting silently through deep space while steam rose gently from the coffee thermos between them. And somewhere beneath Helios Station, deep inside the repaired gravity chamber, the cracks from Ethan Cole's first footsteps still remained permanently etched into the alloy floor.